It's great to see everyone this evening. For those of you who have not attended in the past, Deirdre Labs Speaker Series is a monthly event where founders and leaders share advice on how they overcame challenges, capitalized on their target market, and developed their product, providing you with actionable insight for your own products and processes. For more information, you can find us on Facebook or online at centralmaine.org and deirdrelabs.org under our Speaker Series tab. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this evening's conversation. This free event is presented by Deirdre Labs and is sponsored by CGI, Valley Beverage, Thomas College's Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation, and Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space. In addition, this conversation is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. This evening's conversation is presented by Activas Diagnostics with founder Dr. Marie Hayes. In this speaker series, Marie will discuss how Activas Diagnostics is developing products to assist in the diagnosis of brain injuries through a patented, non-invasive wireless sensor system for sleep monitoring. For those not familiar with Activas Diagnostics is a Orono, Maine-based medical device company that utilizes SleepMove, a fitted mattress undersheet instrumented with 16 hybrid wireless sensors to monitor early stage neurological disease. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And I'd just like to kind of make one edit to the introduction. The 16 sensors are actually 32.
Oh, wow.
So I'm interested in, that might have come from our website, and that will prompt us to review it again. But thank you for that introduction. So today's topic is both a clinical and a business and a science topic, and I'll try to keep the baskets separate from each other, but they all weave together. The story weaves together. So we've developed something that addresses the comfort of doing a sleep study and also the importance of sleep for aging and neurological diseases. So there's really two basic goals, and the first is to make people comfortable and also to provide high quality scientific data related to sleep and home monitoring. And secondly, to answer questions about neurological diseases that are not asked frequently and really is an innovation and a kind of applied outcome of more than 30 years of research. So our problem area is tonight we'll be looking at sleep disorder and Alzheimer's disease and trying to diagnose at the earliest possible time. So this is a prevalence estimate. And without going into the pie too much, basically between 75 and about 85 in purple and blue, most of the cases reside. Younger than that is relatively few. The other important facts I'd like you to take home tonight is that there is a dramatically long period of early mild cognitive impairment, which is the prodrome of Alzheimer's disease. And mild cognitive impairment can be as long as 10 years before the person becomes frankly diagnosable with the Alzheimer's dementia. And so the long early phase we view in medicine as an opportunity, because that means you may actually be able to reverse the disease or treat the disease. So there's a lot of new therapeutics that are very active in this area. Aducanumab was actually approved by the FDA, and that turned out to be a very poor scientific database, but there was such a sense of desperation that we don't have therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease, that the families, I think, to a great extent pushed this approval, but it's not turning out so well. So could we screen for mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's disease? In this figure here, we're talking about Alzheimer's disease as AD and how it changes in the decades before symptoms start. So the life course is on the x-axis, and you can see at about 60 years of age, there's a dramatic kind of bifurcation where amnestic MCI in blue starts to emerge, a long period of time, followed by an acceleration of cognitive decline and a diagnosis of dementia. So for our purposes, we're interested in arresting this early phase and saying, could we actually identify MCI? And the point is that MCI, amnestic means memory related, is actually not easy to diagnose. And in fact, 45 to 50% of people that complain of memory loss and often sleep disorders and forgetfulness, those early symptoms, are not actively screened by their physician. So its second phase, cognitive decline, we cannot reverse the process. So once that takes off and the MCI window is over, there's not much we can do. So scientists are desperately searching for MCI biomarkers, blood tests, saliva tests, skin tests for early diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. If we do an MRI or a CAT scan, we can get an idea in the Alzheimer's brain here. But generally, those changes are not severe at the MCI stage and not even really diagnosable. Finally, we have neuropsychological exams where a neuropsychologist will spend a couple of hours with the patients. And we did this with 120 patients in the last 2 years. And that gives you a very good idea, but extremely costly. Like full-blown sleep lab studies, neuropsych exams are, if they're really correct, they're very expensive. What I'm going to talk to you about today, oh, looks like a PowerPoint error, is I'm going to talk to you about AI, and I know everybody knows about artificial intelligence, and we're going to discuss that for a minute before we talk about the business aspects of our project. But as I've been telling you, MCI sleep debt is a very common problem. In fact, most MCI cases do report a sleep debt. What we found, and this is a kind of complicated aspect of our story, but we found that arousability across the night is actually one of the things that people complain about. They can't sleep, they wake up a lot, etc. That kind of thing will create what's called sleep debt. So if you have insomnia, you have trouble getting to sleep, I guarantee you have depression, just telling you, in case you were wondering. Insomnia, almost in all cases, like upwards of 80%, is psychiatric, right? Anxiety and depression. That's not what we see here. People generally, if they don't have depression, fall asleep quickly. But the arousability, which is called SM, and that's like non-state changes. So they don't wake up, they just become more aroused. The reason it's called SM is it's spontaneous movement. So or movement aroused. If they engage in this activity, you've seen your dog do this in front of the fire, right? That little movement. That could be REM related, rapid eye movement sleep, but it also occurs every 3 to 5 minutes. So it's a very common process. And that's an example of a description of it. If you look in B here, you can see these green areas. Those are the process of SM. The red areas are full arousal, right? So that's a night's sleep. You can see it's occurring all the time, every 3 or 4 minutes. It actually has an effect on respiratory rate, and it actually causes a respiratory rate increase when these occur, which is very productive during sleep. And to answer Dave's question that he asked earlier, how do you know what's your gold standard? How do you know your respiratory measure through the device is actually accurate? And so in blue, we have here a typical thermo respiratory detector, which is typical in polysomnography or sleep studies. And we use that across the night, and we also compared it with the respiratory signal that we were getting with our device. And now it's much better. This was actually a couple of years ago, but it has been getting us funding. It's close enough to be in the 90s. So sleep movements increase respiratory rate unless sleep debt is present. And if sleep debt is present, the sleep movements are actually way down. And the reason they're down is because you're less arousable if you've been up all night for several nights. What happens? The third night, somebody calls you at the bedside and you don't hear them, right? Because the arousability of all systems in the brain declines with sleep debt. So we're losing these very rapid cycling SMs. The respiratory rate does not increase as it should, and this may create chronic hypoxemia. And if we go into the neuroscience of this, we could actually tell a long story that actually shows us that that could be a pathway to apoptosis or brain cell death, which is part of the process of MCI analysis. So what can we do in Activas to change all that? So I keep showing an older person that is female, because in fact, the rates are much, much higher for women, more than 70%. One reason, and this has been dealt with in regression and statistical analysis, but one of the reasons that females are overrepresented is because they live longer. And one of the reasons they live longer, everybody knows the answer to this, is they are stupid. I don't want to say that. They go to the doctor. They're not afraid to complain when they're sick. So they get caught early. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. My brother-in-law the other night had what we call a transient ischemic attack, which means he kind of was blankly staring, which is an early stroke signal, right? We're all sitting on the porch, and all of a sudden he's unresponsive and he starts to slump down in his chair. Okay, so this is an example of a condition that's neurological and is frequently ignored, right? But he's an example of someone that would refuse to be checked out. So we didn't go to the emergency room, as the doctor berated him the next day. You could have had a full stroke after that in the next 4 or 5 hours. So that does seem to be a sex difference, males and females. And he seems to show the classic phenotype of refusing to take it seriously. He turned out he was okay. That's the end of that story. Oops. So the women or the person with MCI frequently has stronger sleep disorder than memory loss. The memory loss is easy to talk yourself out of, right, in the early stages. You could use mnemonics, etc. Tell the primary provider about the sleep disorder, and this is where we come in. So our device, as we're kind of going to tell you about, is home delivered. FedEx or any other carrier can bring it in. Primary provider orders it. And we use this system, which I'm going to describe in detail in a minute, and we monitor for 1 or 2 nights. I think it can be done in 3 hours. So I'm suggesting to the FDA that we can get all the data we need in 1 night. And that overnight sleep test is then followed by a physician's report or a provider's report. And in that, we have the MCI risk score. Hi, thank you for coming. So how does it work then if you do that? Oops, this is actually in the wrong place. Okay. So the wireless non-contact hardware was developed since 2010 by my collaborator, Dr. Ali Abedi. He's in engineering at the University of Maine. He's also the Associate Vice President for Research. Ali and I built this based on a prototype that I had developed at the University of Pennsylvania and had worked with for some 15 years. And based on that, we were able to develop this device, which again has no contact, no physical contact with the body. We put the sensors, embed them inside the mattress cover. It's actually a lamb's wool now. And then we cover the whole thing with an FDA-approved waterproof mattress cover. And that protects our device from any water or urine that may be present. It also is sanitary so that there's no bacterial contact. This can be arranged to be wireless, but sometimes wireless in people's homes is not very good. And so we can also save the data in the device and then send the device the next day back. Some more details. Probably what's special about ours is that it's comfortable, it's accurate, and it's non-invasive. So the comfortable part's over here. If you go to a sleep lab and you want some really accurate sleep data, you use polysomnography, which is EEG. But you probably upwards of $5,000 for a good sleep study. And the polysomnographic process is extremely uncomfortable. And it also respiratory through those belts. There's 2 belts there, one at the diaphragm, one slightly above the chest, and then a myriad of other probes. And these probes usually allow the average person to sleep 3 hours in a 9-hour sleep lab stuff. And I know I've done it myself. Has anybody done a sleep lab?
My husband did it.
It's awful, right?
It's terrible.
So we need a solution, and the solution we're looking for, we hope could be fit by Activas to some extent. So a decade later, we actually got money from NIH to study 100 patients between 2018 and 2020. And we did our study as described, and this is an image for you to think about how we do this analysis. Now, for those of you who are quantitative, you might note this is a time series. So as a time series, you have, essentially, this is probably about, let's see, 85 minutes, 35 minutes, about 50, I was going to say about an hour. In that hour, we're looking at the very rapid changes in SMs that occur in blue. And you could see those peaking over and over very, very frequently. And many of them are followed by a simultaneous increase or very soon after in respiratory rate. In fact, the order is important, and I'll tell you in a minute why. We took that information and we found out, studying a complex group of patients, that I'll see if I could use my cursor here. Is that showing? No. In the training patients, we're basically looking at two groups. Those with mild cognitive impairment, those with normal cognition. And we essentially engage in a deep learning neural net application and essentially train the data to look for pattern. And we're looking for a pattern that actually divides the group. There are 20 in each group for this test. Then we use another group of patients for the verification. And these are actually based on the algorithm we developed. So this locked coefficient and neural net approach. And the MCI-like, and normal cognition were the three types we identified. We focused on MCI and normal cognition. We compared it with the physician's diagnosis, and we developed what's called a receiver operating characteristics for an ROC curve. And the ROC curve was upwards of 90% for sensitivity and specificity. And that result was strong enough to be competitive with the medical device literature. So in medical devices used for these applications, anything above 85 to 88% is considered ready for the next level, maybe for FDA. And we found that our current approach now is to take new patients and see if we can apply our algorithm based on the AI and come up with these three categories. So that's where we're at here. We've already completed this and published it. And we also have a second clinical so that publication is in a computational journal, bioengineering journal. And then the clinical information is in a clinical Alzheimer's journal, and that's under review. So now the fun part that you folks know more about than I do, and that is, what about how do you get this onto the market? And so we're interested in our competitive devices landscape. Without going into too much a description, I think you can see that any product like ABM Sleep Profiler, Compumedics, SomT, Knox Medical, we'll ignore this for a minute. And ABM Sleep Profiler EEG, it's scientifically valid, but there are a lot of complaints in wearing this all night to sleep. Same thing for the diaphragmatic belts, which a lot of people find very uncomfortable to sleep with. But again, this is moderately competitive with our work. There's a thermistor there too, so they can get the information peripherally on the breathing. This one is pretty comprehensive, like a sleep lab. This one here, the 8 tracker, is not scientifically valid. So it looks like our device, but it has no publications. It's really a consumer device for all practical purposes. So if we take just like a snapshot, and I have done this with like 50 different products, right? So I've kind of distilled it into what I think are, the critical points. And that is, as we've said, the SleepMove device is in-home and comfortable. Sleep labs are not, wearables certainly are. Accurate and sensitive, sleep labs are accurate and sensitive. We feel like we've broken through in terms of the scientific validity and usefulness of this device compared to most at-home products. Although I will say some of the respiratory products are working pretty well, but they're not integrated. Ours is more of a neuroscience integrated system. Low cost wearables, again, wearables have less information, generally less accurate information, non-invasive. And we're actually one of the most non-invasive. If you go to Scandinavia, they do have an interest in using a bed approach to sleep analysis. And many of my early ideas did come from that early work and infant work, actually. But they haven't progressed in the applied direction that we have. So what's our value proposition? We get in a lot of trouble with the value proposition because I have to tell you, I don't fully understand it. I spend a lot of time reading about it, but it's really a liberal arts concept, I think. What does it really mean? So my take is our value proposition is we can improve healthcare costs. And I should have put here also early diagnosis. We can give you an example here. If we look at how expensive it would be to run 400 patients for 2 nights at 10 locations over 4 years. We've calculated the cost in a sleep lab, and we've calculated the cost with SleepMove, and you can see the difference is quite dramatic. We're talking about $250 per report, $10,000 to buy the device. So if a physician wanted to buy the device, he or she would still have to come to us for the report. So they could, you know, reduce costs to some extent by giving it to patients directly. Our team is made up of a lot of people. So it's me and Ali. We actually have been working on this since 2007. And we have a long relationship, ups and downs, working full-time, part-time, every combination. But we keep sticking with it. Ms. Esfahani is our chief engineer. She has done a tremendous job in making the device more comfortable. In our early versions, which were plastic encased, we had complaints, and that was hard to take. And we tried a couple, 2 or 3 other versions, and she's come up with the best version. She actually sewed lamb's wool into the device and then embedded the sensors. It was quite amazing. Our postdoc, Samaya Khosrow-Assad, she's an amazing software architect. She actually developed the algorithms with Dr. Vedi. Our clinical team leader, Jessica Orono, she's a neuropsychologist, and she's also a fantastic study team person. Our data management and operations, Chris Gilbert, he's now working for the state in statistics. Our business and marketing strategy, and David, this is relevant. The FDA and regulatory, these are our new people. HP and M was the one I was trying to remember. Adrian Lentz, Hyman Phelps, and McNamara is our major FDA company, regulatory company. But Jason Drabkin is doing our regulatory, so our CMS and interfacing with the FDA process. And Ms. Carey is our JD for this. Our intellectual property, we have Brian Reese and Jeff Spalding for business law. And we have lots of people like in New York that are waiting for us to get to the next level. So we've met some people through the NIH that want to take us on in this task, but we kind of don't want to pay them the rates that they're asking, and they gave us big cuts. So I think if once we raise some more money, we may want to knock on that door again, because they've been very supportive. And then our marketing and business scale up is led by Ted Newell. He's on LinkedIn under Medical Device Success. You can find him anytime. He's really a great thinker about marketing specifically for medical devices. And Leslie Pope is another person that we've worked with for just accounting and budget. So a few points, just to kind of summarize where we are here. We've completed our SBIR, which is Small Business Innovation Research through the NIH for phase 2. We had phase 1 through the DoD. And we've tested 120 patients in their home for a 2-night test. We've also made some progress in the regulatory. Pre-submission was accepted. We have de novo status. So that's good to know, although as I was complaining to Dave, it's not really, we were hoping a 510K, which is where you would be leaning on the work of another device that has got similar kinds of features. The de novo was chosen because our evaluation was that we were actually a completely unique approach using the SMRR ratio. Our FDA software and manufacturing compliance is in process. That is a huge process, Dave. We thought we would do it and pass it in at the same time as the pre-submission. We were over our heads. So we needed to spend about a year on that. We're in knee deep now. Our business model scale up is really dependent on the funding for the marketing plan, which I'll show you in a minute, we're expecting in the next several months. We are going to produce the device and the report as a system that will be offered called SleepMove, and to have it be used in clinics and with physicians. However, the sales and revenue we projected here the last time I presented this in 2023, and I think that is ambitious now. I think it would probably be another year after that, mostly because the pandemic slowed us down. We had to stop our testing in 2020, in March 11th of 2020. I mean, the university called and said, pull out all your, we were testing in a 3-hour catchment area from Bangor to Portland, Southern Maine, and driving all over the place with our device and staff and everything. And we had to just stop it. But at that point, we had essentially finished. We were almost done. So we're done now. So our product pipeline is the following. We have our home bed testing. We have a significant amount of data there. And as I was saying today, the FDA complained to us and said, yes, but you don't have a diverse data set. And I said, well, it's very diverse. Maine is diverse, right? Socioeconomically. It's not diverse ethnically and racially. So they were not happy. Because a lot of the devices, you might have heard this, had problems with African-American skin. So when they use those sensors, which is used for heart rate, for example, the wearables did not detect heart rate accurately against darker skin, but lighter skin it would. It was only tested with Caucasians, so they're not falling for that again. So they were very strict. So we have a couple of options. Currently, we have our colleagues at Mount Sinai in New York City we're hoping to work with. We have colleagues in Montreal we're going to work with, but we don't think that's going to necessarily give us the racial diversity we're working for. So this I think is very testable, solvable. I don't think it's going to be a problem. But the problem might be that the home bed testing would be only what we've run already, and that we'll do clinic testing after that. So it'll be in hospital. The FDA and ICD, as I mentioned, we've finished pre-submission. We do have to come up with more quality control testing in African-American and other groups. We also need to go through the CMS process, and this is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. And FDA and CMS are really in tandem. FDA approves, CMS actually budgets it. So the insurance companies will agree to pay. It's for Medicare and Medicaid, but the insurance companies generally follow the guidance of CMS. So we are working with them through some of the consultants that we have. The ICD codes are ICD-10 means that International Classification of Diseases. We have an ICD code that we are going to use, which is called cognitive impairment associated with aging. And that would be perfect for our device. So we don't have to get a new ICD code, which some people do. Our product launch plan, I'll tell you in a second. And our patents in the pipeline, we have one completed in 2015 and then amended in 2019. That covers most of the technology that we've talked about today, but we have some innovations, particularly in respiration and apnea, which is a very big sale field. And we're ready to put in some patents in that area. So our milestones between 2018 and 2021, we've made a lot of progress in our intellectual property by having this very large patent approved. We've completed the clinical studies that we told you about. We've gotten our pre-submission finished at FDA. We have de novo status, and we've established a very complex system of manufacturing partners that are all in the United States. We try to stick with a US provider. And we also have, not mentioned here, two important scientific papers, which make us, I think, more legitimate for investment. Because we have the paper I told you about, computational paper, and the clinical paper is coming out in the next few months. We have two other papers as well. So there's been some ramp up. There are some conference presentations, I'd say about 6. So the scientific presentation, which is our strength, obviously, we've got that point. We feel very confident that we have a phenomenon here and that it's worth investing in because it's actually solid. So that, I thought, to me as a scientist, that was the most important part about going forward. I really didn't want to go forward unless we could establish in a clinical setting what we had found in earlier studies, which was good to know. So this is our dizzying NIH required imaging that they asked for, and that divides everything up into quarters. This is the business Gantt chart. The product development and testing is the first in yellow, and device manufacturing, again, we have everybody ready to go. We just need the funding for that. Our prototype has been finished for 2 years already. Lab testing, validation, and electromagnetic compatibility is all for FDA data. And that's the part we're really struggling with. We haven't done that yet. We want the funding to finish that. Regulatory, we've spent a lot of money, I would say $50,000 so far. We're FDA de novo approved. We are exploring our reimbursement strategy with some colleagues whose pictures I have. I won't show you, but we're working on that. We are teaming with physicians and hospitals all along, and we're really feeling like we're going to bring this technology to market. Of course, we're very much newbies in marketing research, and we've been studying our customer discovery process from the beginning and taking advice from our business colleagues there, hiring interns in business, trying to work closely with the University of Maine, Jake Ward's team. And we have people hired for the sales aspects. The manufacturing we've described for FDA, we also have for our device, and we're talking about 250 devices by this time next year, and that they would be deployed in the field, and that they would be initially offered free of charge with analyses in order to get our FDA people satisfied. That's our quality control aspect. But you know, the second part is that we want to make sure that the manufacturing of the device for sale has 2 components. Now, this is interesting because you could probably help us with this. I've done a lot of talking about the FDA route and the research we had to do to get there, the clinical research we still need to do. Because that's a long process, and I think it would be a couple more years for sure, and that's conservative. We have also been told to go after a consumer device. So I haven't worked up a PowerPoint for this, but I didn't want to make it too long. But the consumer device angle would be a lot easier because we would be able to go and make much more minor claims. So our claims would be that you could identify sleep disorder or sleep debt, and it would be for anybody to use. And Ollie is of the opinion that people will use it, that average people, college students, may actually make this purchase. How much would the purchase be is a price point question that you folks could probably help us with. We've had everything from $250 to $10,000 as options. And Ollie feels that potentially well-to-do people may actually buy one of these if they could reuse all the time with their Alzheimer's grandmother and see how her progress is. But I think really as a consumer device, it's gonna have more of a general Fitbit kind of impact to be of use. So that angle, again, Ali is very interested in this, so I think we're going to pursue this actually first before we go because we will be done with FDA later. Right, so all of these other pieces are harder, whereas the money for manufacturing and the devices on a consumer device with modest claims, I think would be a fast route. You know, that might take us really, given how much we've already prepared, something like 9 months, we could really do it. Because the manufacturing was ready to go. And it would help us to not make too many, don't put all our eggs in one basket. Because going through it's a pivot, you know, to some extent, because the FDA route, and I just talked to David some length about this, it's very difficult. We've been at it for a couple of years now, and I see some more work ahead and a lot of money spent. So I think $250,000 is conservative of what we're going to spend. So with that kind of high-end goal, we need something to keep our revenue coming through before that. So we really do need more money. So that's kind of where we go. These other sources of funds we're looking into. So MTI has matched us and given us a good amount of money. Bangor Angels, Maine Venture Fund, we have discussed with those folks, and I think, aren't you with one of those groups? No, someone that has the same color hair as you. The Series A funding we're about ready to do. The NIH Phase 2B program we've already applied for. We don't know yet what that's going to be. So again, the bottom line here is we're looking for our next infusion of financing. This is a small list of the amazing students and people that have been involved, and I couldn't be comprehensive in one slide, but these are some of the chief players. This fellow is down at Tufts getting his medical degree. This one is down with one of my colleagues at Boston University School of Medicine. Dr. Khosrow Azad is a software architect in Los Angeles. There's our chief engineer. Jessica's working for Maine Medical Center. And this is Ali and I, and Cliff Singer, who you may know. Anybody know Cliff? He's like the father of Alzheimer's disease in Maine. He's he's an internationally known scientist with 300 publications from Oregon Health Sciences Center. He's coasting with us. We're thrilled to have him. He's been working with us for 45 years. We published together. And Len Kay, you may know. He's a very knowledgeable person, director of the Center of Aging, great friend. He gets some of our funding. So I think at this point we had like potential challenging questions or some other approach. I had put some challenge questions together. These were based on another presentation, but I'm going to have you tell me what would be the next kind of. Do you want to ask for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions either about the company or for the research or just in general?
Generally, we had covered this when I was opening the pizza box. Did you develop your technology at the University of Maine, or has Activas always been?
No, Activas is from the University of Maine. So my first work in this area was at University of Pennsylvania. And I'd actually started that work at Northeastern University and Boston University School of Medicine. So those are the first two institutions. And some of this work was done with animals.
Okay.
So that I was a developmental psychobiologist studying brain development, and eventually became expert in pediatric SIDS, sudden destiny. So when I switched to humans, I was still studying this SM relationship to arousability and whether it could be used as an index of sleep debt with animals and then with human infants and then now with older people.
How's the report compiled? Do you compile the report?
Good question. FDA asked that question too. That's a very good question. You know, we were told by the FDA consultants that the most important thing for us was to have something that the physician or provider could hold in his or her hand and get a number that would say where that person stood in terms of MCI relevant risk. So I have some images of the interface between the MCI group normal distribution and the normal cognition group normal distribution. And look at that in relationship to the delay between SM and RR. So we can look at it and call it time latency. And that's because it's a coupling mechanism, meaning when SM occurs, the neural circuit is such that RR has to increase if it's working at threshold. So SM has to be at a particular threshold. Once it reaches that threshold, it triggers this respiratory response. We also found how rapidly it triggers it is a parameter that we can use to discriminate patients with risk versus patients with low risk, high risk versus low risk. We could actually, with that latency measure, we could actually give a quantitative score and then use it as a Z-score. We could actually see where in relative risk for MCI did this patient fall on the curve, and where did the normal cognition person fall on the curve. And if they fall squarely where they should, or if they're at the edges, that's important. If they're at the edges, they may be MCI-like. If they're squarely under the curve, then they're of that type, either the MCI or the normal cognition. And so we found the third group, we found that there were people that were just beginning to show these features. And so we said, let's look at them in 2 years from now or 1 year from now. So we have that list of patients. They have actually agreed to participate in a follow-up. And we're very curious to see what happens in TL or time latency between SM and RR when they were on those borders. Did they fall into the the MCI group or not? And the other question that we think will have impact in medical science in this area is the idea that if the identification is early enough in the process, which currently it's not, people are usually at dementia 1 by the time they get a diagnosis. Very few people are actually given a mild cognitive impairment diagnosis because they don't get diagnosed. One, because primary physician or provider finds it very difficult to do this diagnosis, and he or she may not have the staff to do it, and they'd be reluctant to make the referral to a neurologist because they don't seem that bad. They seem okay in interview. The physician's evaluation, the provider's evaluation, so they're pretty good. They're okay. That's keeps the insurance company happy. Why? Because if they send them to neurologists, it's right away $10,000. We're going to have all kinds of tests, MRI, sleep studies, all that. How about if we could discriminate people that were really at risk for MCI early on by the primary physician? This is not my idea. This is Cliff's idea. Because I said to him, oh, we'll just sell it to the sleep clinics. And he said, no. We need to know about MCI early, and you have a mechanism to find out for us. So I was very excited by that interpretation because that's a much larger group of people, much more people for a market base, right? And then it also with getting the word out that MCI should be tested, and we actually have a testing mechanism, more people will do it. However, the therapeutics have to follow. So we talked about aducanumab. That's the only drug currently besides Vemetine, which is not very good. It increases cholinergic processes in my good friend is on this medicine and it has very poor scientific background. Aducanumab is quite similar, but it's getting closer because what it's doing is eliminating amyloid. And we know amyloid is involved in this process. We just don't know if it's a corollary or if it's mechanistic. It looks like it's a corollary, and that eliminating amyloid is not going to solve MCI. So what are the therapeutics? And I get asked this the most frequent question is you don't have therapeutics. We don't even care if people have MCI because we really can't treat them. So there's from an unlikely area, from the area of neurocognition and cognitive science, there's a lot of excitement about rehabilitating people whose memory is starting to fail. And this is, people say, well, crossword puzzles or doing the New York Times spelling bee or something like that. This is not really what we're talking about. I mean, there are a ton of scientists out there devising these cognitive ramp up therapies that you bring a person in with MCI 3 times a week and they get 2 hours of training. And they get told a lot about how to apply this in their real life. And there's a current couple of studies coming out that actually say that early MCI can be reversed to normal cognition. Everybody's out of their minds. This is fantastic. So now we will need an early MCI detector. That brings us back into the marketplace, right? But if there is no treatment for MCI, there's a lot of lack of interest both in pharmaceutical and in medical communities. It's really kind of, you take grandma and grandpa and you bring them to the primary, but you really don't think you can fix it. Something's wrong, but we really don't know how to fix it. And so that's where we need therapies. And if we have some more therapies, which we think are coming down the pike in the next 2 to 3 years, then MCI detection is going to be a lot more popular as something to order. I think I long-winded that one. So.
I was just gonna say, Dr. Hayes, first I applaud you for starting with the FDA regulatory part early rather than right when you're getting ready to get.
Very
on the market.
first year.
That's fantastic. I did notice you had some funding from MTI. Was
Yeah.
that specifically for FDA regulatory support, or was that?
Yes, actually, part of it was specifically for regulatory support. We had some of it was for business aspects, so getting us more business expertise. And of course, we played that as focusing on the regulatory, because that's where I thought the money was. You've got to get them through the regulatory.
Right.
But now we're thinking that was very ambitious, and we need to say it's going to still take us a little longer. In the meantime, we need to do something
I
else.
bring that up because when I spoke to some folks at MTI a few weeks ago, they said that they would match dollar for dollar up to a pretty high amount. Was it 100K or maybe larger, specifically for FDA regulatory support?
Oh, I'm going to check that out.
So you may want to talk to those folks again. Secondly, as stated earlier, I really don't believe your de novo process is really any higher than the 510K. It's basically 510K equivalent from my regulatory perspective, much better than having to do a PMA. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. And the fact that FDA has stated that already is actually a good thing, I believe. My next question for you, regulatory wise, is so the first thing I tell small companies that have a device that's going to be regulated by the FDA is develop that in indications for use statement like you would have on an application to the FDA. And that statement should drive everything you do to bring your device to market. So have you got a pretty solid indications for use statement developed already?
Yes, it's about 30 pages long.
Okay.
And they actually, the consultants stress that as like, before we do anything, let's just do indications for use.
Okay.
And we've honed it down. We did present it to the FDA and it was only
Right.
about 5 or 6 pages, single spaced, but
Yeah.
it's pretty much where it's at is your indications for use.
Yep,
Yeah,
good,
and
okay,
I
good.
didn't know that. I learned it.
Yep, yep,
It's a different language,
good, good.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have more questions for you.
We'll talk after.
Okay. So,
Well, not a question, but more a thought. If you were looking to make it a commercial product, as someone who has pretty bad insomnia, I would definitely be interested in it, and I would love to see it like connect the data to like your health app on your phone, so that when you
yeah, we have been told that,
Yeah.
that maybe our device would be appropriate for an existing consumer device. And that we could speak with the Fitbit people out there
Yeah.
in all different areas and see if there's traction for adding this dimension. Yeah, but it's not gonna be on the watch. We could have the data collection on the watch.
Because like on your phone, they have like like apps that you can get that do sleep analysis.
It's
They
not good.
don't actually do
Okay,
anything. This would
It's
be a way
terrible.
to
Yeah, did you know it's
really-
terrible?
Oh, yeah, because.
It's beyond terrible. It's actually false advertising.
Yeah,
It should be litigious. Because I'm in sleep, you know, and I tried it for 2 years because I said I'd give them the benefit of the doubt, figured they hired people like me to do this. They didn't.
so you could be the first person in that space to.
There's a lot of people like me that are already trying to do that. I'm not gonna win that one. But I would like to be involved as a, you know, one of the consumer applications. And I think people are attracted to like a non-contact mattress device. It's kind of like, I don't know what it is about it. It's just attractive to people. Like we had no trouble. Once we told the aging people what the device was, that it wouldn't contact their body and that their sheet went over the top. Dude, everybody signed up. So I think it's because it doesn't hurt. Yeah. So
Does it use in terms of sending the data to the logger, is it using like a standard protocol or something that?
we can do both, you know, so we have it arranged for either collecting the data right on the device. And then, of course, getting the report would always require you to send it to the internet and send us the data. So if you use the wireless aspect,
I
but
guess
it's
my question is it like in a standard format or protocol that could work with other devices, or is it in like a proprietary storage format?
which part is proprietary?
The like how the data are stored.
Oh, stored is not proprietary, so it could be stored on the device itself. You could take it out as a thumb drive, right, and you could mail it to us. Or you could use your wireless internet and
Okay,
just
so it's
collect
just
it
being stored
dynamically.
as
It's just an
file,
app.
Like a file.
Yeah, that part is easy to solve. There's just so many devices out there that use those same tricks, you know. But there's a lot I think the issue really for us, if we do a consumer device, is to find people like Ted Newell, who we medical device success, to connect us to the right companies that may be interested in incorporating our technology into their own devices. And the same is true for the FDA approved device as well. So Respironics, which you may have heard of, Philips Respironics, they're like, you know, Mr. Sleep kind of thing, and everything in sleep is actually eaten up by that company. It's a German, a Siemens company, right? So Siemens is all of engineering, right? And then Philips is, I think, Netherlands, and then they bought Respironics, which was an American company, which I worked for. And Respironics will do anything creative. They will take a chance. So we have held back to going to Respironics, but we're about thinking maybe they'll take on all the FDA work and they'll take it if we convince them that this is worth developing. And we'll lose a lot of money doing it that way. But this is really an expertise that business people need to take on. I think it wore us out tremendously to try to be business people as well as scientists. We're really tired. I think business people have their own expertise that you can't do without. You know, we thought, oh, we'll do it ourselves. Typical scientists, you know, so many people have told us that, you know, oh, you're just like everybody in your group that won't let us help you. But what happens, and I suppose this is, everybody knows this is like the open secret, is that when the business people move in, they kind of squeeze out the scientists and they say like, oh, we're done with you. Okay. And then those people have their interest in them. But that's a loss because there's so many more patents that we have in mind for this company. So they should keep an R&D going on this angle, but they might not. They might say, we just want this particular application, and well, that may be the end of our story. That may be our exit strategy. I never knew what exit strategy meant for at least 4 years.
Do you see any potential applications either in the future or the short term with neurological diseases such as Parkinson's or even Huntington's?
Yes, and I have to try to restrict myself from naming all the ones that I think are going to be involved. So we were funded for traumatic brain injury, which talk to Dave about. You've been in that area. We were funded by the DoD because, it was Afghanistan at that time, and, traumatic brain injury was a big problem because there was so many people coming home with it and they didn't know how it happened. Of course, as you know, this is like one of the most common injuries. Children have sports traumatic brain injuries, it's very, very, very common. And we worked very closely on that with, the Boston Center for Traumatic Encephalopathy, which is Boston University. And they have done the most on CTE, which is, let's see, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And that disease is the football players kind of disease. So I've worked with Dr. Cantu, who was like the world authority in that. He wanted to fund us for pediatric sleep, pediatric sports traumatic injury for our device. So I think that's a low hanging fruit. Another one is obviously Parkinson's, but Parkinson's is watched very closely by the sleep neurologists now, and they have ways to detect it themselves using periodic leg movements. So that's kind of taken out of our hands. The CTE, I think we can do in child, anything with trauma, I think we can do. The last one, and the one that I'm very interested in besides Alzheimer's disease and TBI, is other orphan neurological diseases that haven't really been studied in relationship to sleep. So frontal lobe dementia is one of the kinds of dementia. So I think all of the neurological diseases are associated with sleep disorder. I think there are no exceptions, and it makes sense because your brain is in charge of your two critical states, wake and sleep, right? And if those aren't working really well, then you're in trouble. And when sleep is restorative, so if you have a neurological disease, it makes sense that the degenerative process would mess up some of the complex architecture of sleep, which involves the whole neuraxis from the front to the brainstem. It all has to be integrated, and it's timed across a 6 to 8 hour period. What occurs when? And there are circadian aspects. I spent my entire life since I was 23 studying this. It's a fantastically rich area for finding out how the brain's working or not working. You could see things wrong in babies. We're doing a SID study with the Rue Institute in Portland. I was funded with some Northeastern professors to do that, and we're doing the same thing. We're looking at sleeping infants, and we're seeing, again, these SM changes that are associated with SIDS. And SIDS is fatal, as you know, son of a decibel, right? So you don't usually catch the baby before the baby's gone, unless you have a device to catch the baby. So who's at risk, who isn't? It's a highly rare disease. We have as few as 15 cases a year in Maine. That's about 4,000 births. So do the math, it's very rare. So it's not the best disease for a business application. However, there are a lot of parents that want to screen their infants, and that's where we could come in. They've asked us about that. So we think this application, to answer your question, could be also useful for SIDS and other pediatric brain anomalies too.
How many nights of sleep do you have to monitor?
I need 3 hours. I'm done. I'm telling you, I can do the whole thing in 3 hours. And the reason is that it's a 3 to 4 minute rhythm. So the periodicity of the SM is 3 to 4 minutes. So how many times do you need that repeated to show the coupling with respiration? Is pretty fast. You can also show the decline in SM, both frequency and duration, although I don't want to get into all the details. The duration is what's most affected by the sleep. So in other words, it's a less vigorous arousal event and not vigorous enough to trigger the respiration. So those kinds of things are,
Are there factors that could create false data, like if someone maybe consumed alcohol or something before they?
That's a problem with human studies. They say, no, I didn't consume alcohol, and then they did consume alcohol. And as you know, aging people are always dealing with kind of a decline in function in their brain as they age. They're always adapting to it. And that adaptation is very, very challenging. And if they have an actual disease process, the idea that they wouldn't be consuming alcohol, and they wouldn't be depressed, and they wouldn't be anxious, because they're human beings. These are human beings. Every older person, as they start to go into these conditions like MCI and dementia, has a very strong psychiatric component, because you are being a problem for people caring for you and interacting. You're not as interesting a friend as you used to be. And so these folks develop more loneliness. And this is the bane of aging researchers. What do we do when a person is no longer so interesting to talk to? Then people aren't going to talk to them, right? So we want to get to the stage where it's just emerging to see if this phenomenon of reversal is possible, because it is for every other disease. If you have skin cancer, or you have some kind of breast cancer or something like that, there's a lot people can do for you, right? And reverse the process and bring you back even to a cure. So I don't see why neurological diseases, if they're not clearly genetically based, and Alzheimer's disease is genetically based, but also has a huge comorbidities with alcohol, psychiatric disease, and also substance abuse. And aging people are more likely to engage in substance abuse when they're aging than any time in their life. And it makes sense if you're, I'm a psychologist originally. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it's a time in life when your usefulness and your integrativeness with your family declines, because your contribution and your limitations start to occur. So how long can we keep people with high quality life? You have to use exercise, Mediterranean diet, and stimulation, right? And this cognitive stimulation. How much cognitive stimulation? I think it's a lot more than what we give retired people. I think retired people are making a mistake. They need to not sit down and read another novel. They need to get out, interact with the community, get a part-time job, babysit all those kids, even when they don't want to. I babysit today. I babysit every day. Because the challenge, that emotional challenge, creates cognitive challenges, solutions. And those solutions work your mind like you were younger. Because my daughter is 43, and the things that go on in her mind in an hour, I couldn't keep up with. It's just unbelievable what a young, vibrant person does with their head all day. And then you take a retired person, they're asking for trouble. They're telling their brain, there's really nothing we need to do. We could just go to a movie. It's not a good approach to aging. If you look at how people have aged in the past, in the history of aging, people usually work till they die. And people didn't live as long, so we have that's called the secular trend. So the secular trend is people are living much longer. We don't really know what to do about that. So we want to keep the quality of life at a high level. And I'll become a psychologist in a minute if you let me. So stick me back to the business stuff. But the comorbidities of aging is what causes the process to accelerate.
Just had a comment. I agree with you on that. My parents are both 87 years old. My dad walks every day. He walks 2 miles a day at 87. He still walks. I think COVID was really hard on him, and I know that he is somewhat
Declined from that.
And just from not going out and not interacting with people, not having coffee with all his buddies, and I think it really did make. It really did.
Yeah, my mother-in-law too.
Yeah.
She turned from MCI to dementia during those 2 years.
Is there data now on that?
Not, a lot of people are studying it, but I haven't seen anything too much yet. It's coming out. Mostly it's about, how can we combat COVID medically? The psychological effects are going to come next, and they're going to be huge, especially for children and for elderly people that depend on the whole community. Like you folks have to do all the work, okay, for us and for the kids. And I said to my daughter, the reason everybody's asking you for everything is because you're the most highly functioning member of the community when you're a young person, right? And older people, need to hold on to their skills as long as they can.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, I'm glad it was.